thank you all for being here. We've got a great crowd. Yeah, this is really, really good. And I know we're being joined, I think, by another 100 or so online. So Judith has brought everybody out. So this is Lunch with the Genius. And this is an exciting time on campus. I mean, here we are, I think we're still in the summer, especially we go outside and you can feel it at the end of July. And the campus is actually starting to come alive really quick. We've got a lot of students coming back. Band pre-camp is going to happen. Football players, a lot of the athletes are coming back. But this is also a special time of the year. And we don't do this every year. In fact, we've only done it 12 times in 120 years since we've been around, having a new president. And so Dr. Biff Williams started his tenure on July 1st. Tomorrow he gets his 1-month pin of service. So we're going to do a pinning ceremony for that. But it has been a whirlwind of activities as we bring our 12th president of the university on. We've had a lot of events. We actually had an event here this morning. He's getting out to meet a lot of people throughout Springfield, but throughout the state. We were in St. Louis yesterday or 2 days ago and Sunday. And we even got Dr. Williams got to throw out the first pitch at Busch Stadium. And it was really good. It went across home plate, 99 miles an hour. But I know he'd like to would like to have him greet you and give you a university update. So if you please welcome our 12th president of Missouri State, Biff Williams.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Missouri State. I've been looking forward to this Lunch with the Genius and especially to hear from Dr. Martinez. So this is a real treat for me. But I can't thank you enough for the hospitality. I would be remiss if I didn't thank President Smart, who's here today. I have watched president after president transition in my other states, and it's always rough, but he was so kind to me and included me and still mentors me. And Dr. Mallory, knowing him too, I just want to publicly thank him because he's been so kind to me. So thank you, President Smart. I appreciate you being there. I thought I'd give you, so day 31, Brent didn't tell you a lot about the pitch. He told the pitch was right. It was a strike. It was probably only 97 miles per hour. But the trash talking he was doing before I threw that pitch, I was about to throw up on the field. But it was fun. Now I know Brent and I know a little bit more about what he'll do. I hope his golf game's better as trash talk. And now it begins. So just to share a few things, what I've been doing the last 30 days, a lot of meetings. We've had 5 events here in the morning where we're meeting stakeholders and donors, and it's just been so great to hear the stories of bears, and especially being in St. Louis and greeting those individuals and having individuals come up and seeing people from 1971 and 70 and 72, they were athletes together and they're still sitting at the table and how they've been together for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And to have others that came in and said, we met as freshmen and we were roommates and now I'm a judge and she's an attorney. And it's just been fun to really hear the impact that Missouri State University has had on so many people. And for us, we've learned a lot about the community. I'm on a transition plan, so there's 7 pages of people that I have to meet, and I think they fit them into the first 30 days. Now I need to go meet them again so I remember their names. But I've loved the collaborative nature of Springfield. I've loved being part of the Allied Health Alliance, the Healthcare Professional Alliance, the camaraderie with the city council and with the other educational leaders and going to meetings and hearing how we're solving like problems. And a lot of that has been really the foundation's been laid by my predecessors, and I appreciate that. But it's been a great 31 days. Tomorrow we have our first Board of Governors retreat, and we'll be meeting in Lake of the Ozarks, and we'll be talking about future planning and creating a new robust long-range plan. And we will be inviting many of you to be involved with that because it's gonna be our plan. It's not gonna be my plan, and it's gonna be similar to former plans that we have where we all come in and pitch in and we look at what does Missouri State need to look like in the next few years. But I just want to thank you for the opportunity to have you here. And if you haven't met me yet, I'll stay after. I'd love to meet as many of you as possible. And I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about Dr. Martinez. Thank you.
All right, this is the time when we, if you've been to these before, where we bring someone that you may know or may not know, but we really get into their life history, how they became a genius, and how they have had a major impact on the university. So would you please welcome our genius, Dr. Judith Martínez. You get the hot seat right here. And Judith, welcome, welcome. And I know, like I said, we've got a lot of people online. They want to hear your story. You haven't heard the questions we're gonna ask. And it'll all be in fun, but nothing real bad.
I don't know if I should trust you.
Yeah, you can. Okay, let's start from the very beginning and tell us about, how you grew up, where you grew up, and what were you like as a kid?
My mom's here, so I cannot lie. I grew up in Monterrey, Mexico. I was actually touring Brent yesterday, so I was telling my children how my mom was really, really, really strict. She was always very good at helping me with homework. Every day, whenever I came back from school, she would sit down and make sure that I get my homework right. She was very strict with spelling. She's an educator too, so I'm a child of an educator. And but she was always present with me, and so I have really good memories because she would do my hair every day. I had curly hair and I would cry. I didn't like, but she was very patient. And she also took me to all my lessons. Every afternoon I had gymnastics and I had karate and I had swimming. And she always said it's mandatory. It's not a choice, it's mandatory. And so I had to do that every day, but she would sit there, even though I had my face that I didn't want to do it. She was patient.
Yeah.
Good memories, yeah.
Tell us about your mom. What all?
Well, I want my mom to stand up and everybody give her a round of applause.
Come on.
Let's say something that Cliff said one time, so I'm gonna quote him. She's a badass lady. Yeah, she's a badass, she's a politician. She's a survivor of domestic violence, but she has accomplished a lot of things. She's known the past 5 presidents of the country. So, she called them dude. And sometimes I was, Mom, what? I call her sometimes and she's like, oh, when I'm at the UN, I need to vote. Mexico, here, this is my, okay, I just, that's a huge role model. So, I think she's a genius.
Welcome. Very much so. But when you were growing up as a kid, and you made good grades, yes?
Yes, always,
Yeah.
yes, until now. I had my PhD here. Well, maybe I should be so arrogant, but I don't care. I never made less than a 95 ever in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, I've always been a really good student.
So what did you want to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to defend people, and especially family law. And that was my just defend children and women, especially from domestic violence.
So how did you get from Monterey to Springfield, Missouri?
Well, Andrea's here. I call her my sister because her father was recruiting teachers in Mexico. And I was not supposed to meet him, but they told me that they needed a translator for somebody from Missouri, Cliff, from Missouri, who didn't speak Spanish, and that he wanted to recruit teachers, and I was a French teacher. And so the English teachers didn't want to volunteer to translate, and I said, I'll translate. And so they said, well, you're a French teacher. And I said, no, I swear I speak English. I can do it. And so he said, okay, you translate. I went in early in the morning to translate for this man who spoke better Spanish than me, better Spanish. He was a literature professor at Missouri State. Many of you know him. And I did not want to come to Springfield because I had just finished my law degree. And I was very involved in the campaign in Mexico for my party, for my political party. But he just insisted that it was beautiful, that I was gonna do great, that I was already used to the weather because I've lived in Quebec and I wasn't gonna be bothered by the ice. And, he told me that it was the most beautiful place in the world and that I should try it and that I was gonna be a good fit. And he just kept telling me that. And he said, you can go to the university, and study more. We talked about books, and I'm not sure how, but he convinced me. And I said, I'll do it for a year. You want to know what the problem was?
Mm.
The problem was that, my dad didn't want me to come here because he said, you're in a dangerous age. You may get married. And I said, I'm not gonna get married, Dad. I'm not. I'm gonna come back and be a lawyer and do everything I'm dreaming of and be a politician. But when we landed, Dr. Norton asked me what I wanted to eat, and
So how old were you then? when you came in? Oh, it's okay. You're young. You're young. You're very young. Questions you shouldn't ask, but you were young. You were very young.
Very young.
You're still very young.
Yeah, I was very young. Thank you. I was very young, and he gave me choices. I remember he even mentioned Mr. Yen. Remember that restaurant, Mr. Yen?
Oh,
He mentioned restaurants. And my mom, as strict as she is, gave me the look like pick something. You're not gonna pick the onions out. And so I was like, oh. Then, Dr. Norton said, oh, what about Italian? And I said, perfect. You can always have the pasta, And then he said, oh, and the owners, by the way, are your age. You can meet some friends.
Oh.
And so we got to Avanzare. It was an open kitchen. I looked through the kitchen and I said, that's it. I kept going to that restaurant every single day because I thought there was an Italian guy there. It's an Italian restaurant. I didn't know he was Mexican. I thought I would go to Europe, but I ended up in Missouri. Here I am.
Do you want to introduce?
My lovely husband, with a maroon hat.
I love it.
Yeah, I made him wear that today. Yeah, university colors. Yeah.
Julie,
Yeah.
thanks for being here. And good food, by the way. Excellent food. Excellent food. So on the academic side, though, you went from where to where to where?
Yeah, I went to, Dr. Norton was my main guide. He advised me to continue and do a master's degree, even though I had a degree in education. And he said, you should do a master in education with literature. And then he really wanted me to pursue a PhD. I wasn't really thinking about that at the beginning, but he really made a huge impact in my life. He just showed me the beauty of my own culture, and I just fell in love with literature. And so I really wanted to teach literature more than anything. I thought that through literature, you could change the world, you could change how people view things, you could change perspectives. And I pursued my degree in my PhD in literature. And I remember David is not here and he's gonna be in trouble, but David Huff told me when I was deciding which PhD to choose, I told him, should I choose this one that's gonna make a lot of money, or should I choose literature? And he said, you should choose what your heart desires because you don't want to have a job. You want to have a career. A career is forever. A job, you will retire. And I followed his advice and I don't think I have a job, you know, people tell me work too much, I'm not working. I'm enjoying what I do every day.
So you speak French?
I speak French and I speak English.
So, let's talk about your research. You have a whole wide variety of research. Tell us about that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I became very interested in, the violence that happens in Mexico because, you know, when I was growing up, my mother made us, she was in charge of opening schools in rural areas in Mexico. And so she would take us, you know, we were growing up and she would take us every weekend to this rural place in Mexico, which is not the same as rural up here in Missouri. Or in the US, it's poverty, you know, it's a lot of poverty. I mean, we would take things to those, to the people there and sometimes they wouldn't have even water, you know, and we would give them soap and they would tell us we don't have any water. And then I found out that these people were migrating, you know, when I came to Missouri, a lot of those people, you know, I know where they were coming from. So I became interested on why those people were migrating and, you know, what were the reasons and why was Mexico not keeping their people and, you know, what the journey was like. And so my research really focuses a lot more on what I call forced migration, because people don't want to leave. They leave because they have to, and they are willing to risk their lives in order to find just survival. And so that's one of the things that I do. The other thing has to do with the violence in Mexico and why, you know, because I grew up in politics, why, you know, how corruption impacts the violence that happens in the country and how that impacts women, how that impacts children. And so I study a lot of those topics, the violence in Mexico.
So then how often do you go back to Mexico?
Well, I just came back 2 days ago.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a mama's girl. I'm very, as you can tell, I'm very, we are very, very family oriented in my culture. And so, you know, I go every time that I can. The past 3 years, I counted, 3 years ago, I counted that I had missed 22 birthdays of my mom. And I said, I don't care anymore. And I don't know if I should say this in front of the president, but I told my students, you know what? I'm gonna be sick for 1 week and I'm going to go because I'm not missing my mom's birthday anymore. And you know, that weekend, I'm gone. It's a weekend though. It's a weekend.
Well, I didn't notice you had a sniffle when you were gone. So you were sick.
Yeah, I was sick, yeah, I was. But I haven't, for the past 3 years, I haven't missed her birthday and I won't anymore.
So tell us what you do now on campus and is the research integrated with what you're teaching now, or how do those things
Yeah.
combine? Because you do language, cultures, religion, you're associate professor here.
Right,
So
right.
tell us how all that integrates.
Yeah, I think, you know, my favorite class to teach is literature. You know, I teach languages as well. And when you learn a language, you have to learn the culture, right? My dad always wants me to translate jokes. And he's obsessed with, you know, translate this. And I'm like, that does not make any sense in English. It's not funny, that. It's not, you're not, no. And so, you know, I just decided to pretend that I'm translating and I'm not. But I teach a literature class, and really my goal is to bring awareness, you know, to bring awareness to students on what the reality is in different parts of the world. If you truly want to learn a culture, you have to read their literature. And so through that, I think, you know, one of my goals is for students to fall in love with reading. That's the main thing. And then second, to fall in love with a different culture and to understand that through reading is where they can understand and enhance their view, enhance their perspective, and really later translate those emotions, and this is what I tell them, into motion, you know, and really try to change the world. Because, I always tell them, too much information, you're just gonna become arrogant. You don't need a degree and don't get a degree if you're not gonna use it to change the world. So, and I truly believe that I'm teaching, the next leaders of the world. So I consider myself a bridge that uses her research to enhance the way they see things so that they can go out there and change other people and change the world, change their behaviors, change their society, change their community, and make an impact.
So why French?
Well, I wanted to go, I'm a lawyer, right? So our law comes from Napoleonic law. So I wanted to go to La Sorbonne, and my dual degree in, read, Jim Robinette is here, he probably knows what I'm talking about, Julian Boncasse, and read it in French and be at La Sorbonne. And, I wanted to live there and be a lawyer. And that's why when I went to Avanzare and saw an Italian guy, I said, okay, that's next to France. I'm going. Turned out to be Mexican, but anyway. French was because of the law, Napoleonic law.
In the future, what are other things that you really want to research on? Or do you want to continue your current research and continue to expand that?
Yeah, I really love my kids. And when I say my kids, it's, of course, Angel and Gio, but my own children, but I love my students. They're really my passion, and I really want to continue working, but especially, students that are from a Hispanic background and that look like me, and I want to help them understand that they're not half Hispanic, half American, but that they are American and Latinos. I want to do more research so they can feel empowered and that they can use their superpowers to really change the society and the community and be up there, doing great things.
But you're involved in the campus and so many other things. I mean, from education to languages. Tell us about your involvement.
Yeah, well, my recent one would be Bear Bridge, right? That's a recent one. It wasn't a love story when I came to Missouri State. I did struggle, of course, Robert was always by my side and Dr. Dowdy, and I have, Judith Martínez, Melanie, I have great colleagues, but getting tenure, it's a lonely process. It's lonely. Faculty gets in their silos and then you forget about everybody and you're just, stressed. People think you go and teach, but most of the things that we do it's a research. And people don't know about the double-blind review. There's people that have written, anyways, we have a double-blind review process that is very hard, right? It's very rigorous. And if you don't have anybody to help you along the way, people have become depressed, anxious, they resigned, and I realized that was something that was going on, people were struggling. So I decided to create a program where people would have what I had. I had Robert by my side. So, that every time that I had something, a question or whatever, Robert would be there to mentor me. So I thought a mentoring program for new faculty, especially faculty that came from different places or from different parts of the world or the country, or, would be something that would be like a bridge, that people wouldn't have to cross by themselves, but they would have somebody, all these imposter syndromes, all these questions, if they found there's really good people on campus. And I remember when I created this program, I literally wrote a list of people, which is something that Frank told me, when you choose mentors with good heart. And I made a list of people. And some people didn't make it to the list, but they'll put, it might be recorded anyways. So I made a, okay, I'm not here. But I made a list of, people who were, Dr. Ismet is here, people who are just wonderful people, good with good souls. That's it. They're just ready to help. They don't judge you. You feel safe asking questions. And, and then we assign them, mentees. This is a program that didn't happen on its own. I had a lot of, support. Cliff was a great supporter. Wes Brad, was a great supporter. And of course, Frank was a great supporter. So, I had the support. And it has worked. It's something that has worked really well. And I think part of it is because I went through the fire, I know what it was like to be, tenure track and not to be from here. And, I didn't speak the language, as a native speaker. All these things. I was a woman, I had children. So now, for instance, we have something that is called academic parents. So when I had, my children, if I look at the pictures, they're everywhere in all my events in the university. I would bring them in a car seat, but I worked for David Huff, and he makes he jokes about it, but I took him to Mexico several times for exchange programs, and he would hold Gio. Gio is that tall guy over there, but he would hold Gio when he was 2 years, and just so he wouldn't cry while we were in meetings. But that not every boss does that for you. And, I have pictures with my children everywhere. And now with academic parents, what I do, because, I couldn't socialize much because I had my children and they were my priority. So now I do events where people, faculty, tenure track faculty, or any faculty can bring their children. And I have activities for the children as well. So, now I'm almost an aunt for everybody. And then, they go to each other's parties, they go to birthdays together, and I'm, very happy that I've been able to make those connections.
So what was it like coming into the United States for the first time?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends, because I came here when I was 14. I went to a boarding school. I'm Presbyterian. My pastor is here. I'm very Presbyterian. Well, yeah. My grandpa was a Presbyterian pastor for 70 years. And so they sent me to a Presbyterian school. And so it was a very rigorous school. It was different. I'll tell you an example. We grew up very poor. Anyways, we grew up very poor. And the school that I went to was a public school, and we didn't have any windows in the school. And there was a lot of graffiti and everything, but I remember we didn't have windows. And then when I went to that school, I had a scholarship in the private school, the Presbyterian school. And one day, it was in Texas, in Corpus Christi, one day they canceled school because we didn't have AC. And I thought, what? Do you not sweat? We go to school freezing in Mexico, and I remember I couldn't move my hand because it was too cold. Or we go to school and it's super hot and you're just sweating. You just sweat, and my hometown is 2 hours away from Texas. So the weather is almost the same. So, to me, that was something different. And then when I came to Missouri, Cliff, when I came here, I remember there was a meeting and it got very heated, and they were talking about the book we were going to use to teach the language. And I thought, or the book we were going to use to teach something. And I thought, wow, in Mexico, I have a chalk and a chalkboard, and I can do magic. Everything is here. I don't care which book you give me. Anything you give me, it's an extra resource for me. And I thought, we have a saying in Mexico, let's do it the Mexican way. In other words, let's make it work. And so it was, it was different. It was different. It wasn't like I saw in the movies. I also worked in Sparta for a while, and it was different.
But you could go anywhere with what you've done and your research in any university. Why Missouri State?
Mm-hmm. This is I have two reasons, and it's Angelo and Gio. I really think that Springfield has a lot of jewels. I think it's a gem. I write for the newspaper, a hidden gem, but I think Springfield, it's really a Springfield. I like the place because my children can grow up here and they have good friends. Honestly, in the community, I have always felt very welcome. I have always felt like some of the best friends that I've made here, are lifetime friends. You know, my friend Jenny, she's my sister. She's here. We've been friends for ever since she landed. And so, Mark Cook is here, who's a great supporter. And, they're just people that we've met through the university, through the restaurant, through, I remember Bob, how he, I met him when I first came here to Springfield too, and we would write and read poetry together. And, of course, he's a writer, but, I've met really good friends that are very loving and that are very kind. And, that's what I wanted for my children. Mexico got a little bit violent, and with my mom being in politics, I wanted to be in a place where my children could be outside playing. And I think, I've accomplished, I think so. I think they're good. They turned out good. They eat like they hate me, but.
We got some pictures. Let's go to the screens, because I know, it's always good to see, pictures of the family. Explain all these.
Well, that's the Italian guy that I married. Yeah, we're in Burgundy too, and that's Gio. That's Gio when he was 9 months. So look at that. You asked me how old I was. I was very young.
Yes, you were.
Yeah, and then I have poodles. I love poodles. And that's Eric Elizondo. That's I shouldn't have favorite students, but he was my students 18 years ago in Mexico. And every time I go to Mexico, I always visit my students. And then the other ones is my two boys. Gio is in Grinnell. He's studying math and economics. Very good students, both of them. And then Angelo is in Central High School in the IB program. And there's a cowboy.
Let's go. There you go.
Well, I'm in love with my nieces. I don't have any girls, so I steal them from my sisters. And so those are my 3 nieces. And then my brother is the one in the picture down there. I have one brother who's also a lawyer. He's a very, very important lawyer in Latin America. I'm very proud of him. And my sister-in-law was my sister. And then that's my favorite uncle. I shouldn't say he's my favorite uncle, but he is my favorite uncle. And then right there, every time I go to Mexico, he brings me mariachi. Mariachis are very expensive in Mexico. And every time I go, he's like, "A mariachi for you, my queen." And I'm very spoiled. Those are my kids. That's it. See, those are my students. They're the love of my life. I can't tell you, I always say, the day that I complain and not, about them, I need to stop teaching. But I just absolutely adore them. They're just my hope.
Yep, let's go on to the next.
Those are my cousins. So one of my cousins is here. My mother has 3 sisters, and they kind of decided to raise us as sisters to the 6 of us. And so we're very, very, very close. We're all different, but very close. Those 2 pictures are in parties. If you know our family, well, Kulan says that, she says, you really know how to party. And we do. We do.
Next group.
That's Andrea. Andrea's right here. And Nicole. Yeah. Stephanie Matthews is there. Yeah. Jenny's my best friend with my sister there. Then that's in Costa Rica. Everybody should go to Costa Rica. It's my favorite coffee. Yeah. And that's in a concert from Luis Miguel, which I was in the front row, and I had to brag in social media because he's like the Michael Bublé of Mexico. And oh my gosh, it was just, I'm obsessed with, well, not really Joy.
Sorry.
That's Jenny again, and Tomiko. And that's Joy's family, and then that's Joanna, who couldn't be here. She's my other close friend. And the other ones are the Gonzalez. Judith Gonzalez is a very popular woman in the community. She's the director of Hand in Hand Multicultural Center. So whenever they have huge events, they kind of take us in as family. So I'm very blessed. You know, I have a lot of family here from different.
Okay, let's go on to the next.
My sisters again, my mom, you know, my sisters, and that's Robert. So if everybody could give him a huge hand of applause.
Yeah. All right. Go on.
That's Wes. Wes is in trouble because he's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he
he's
should
in
be.
trouble.
We'll get him in trouble. All
Yeah.
right.
He retired against my will, like Jim Baker. Whatever. Yeah, that's Bob Stevens. He's there. Yeah.
Mayor's here.
Yeah, the mayor. I know. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. So and we're gonna get to questions, and again, this is a more of a conversation, so if you have questions, we're gonna get to that. But we go through a lightning round where, yeah, we forgot to tell you about that, but
Is that an American thing?
yeah.
Okay.
Where I give you a question, you can't think long on it, whatever
Okay.
pops in your mind. The
Throw
first,
it in slip.
you just say,
Okay.
it. So the first few are pretty easy. If you get these wrong, then you'll get them wrong. Your favorite restaurant in Springfield?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Evan's, all right. Knew that one. The best chef in Springfield, Missouri.
Jesus Garcia, Chuy, show me Chuy. Tell me.
That's right. All right. Do you wear the hat at the restaurant? I have not seen you wear that, but you should. I do like that one. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
Morning. How early do you get up?
I'm at 5:30 every day at my hot yoga.
Very good. Movies or books?
Books.
Books.
Yes.
And what books? Fiction, nonfiction?
Nonfiction. Juan Rulfo.
Okay,
Rulfo's my favorite. It's
okay.
like a William Faulkner kind of. Right.
Good.
Yeah.
Favorite vacation spot?
Antigua, Guatemala.
Ah.
Yeah, Guatemala, Antigua. Melanie's from Guatemala.
Your favorite spot on campus?
Traveler's Cafe.
That's not on campus. So that's around. Okay. Okay, that's good. Good. This may be an easy one. Good party or quiet time?
Good party.
Yeah. All right.
Latino style.
There you go. Ocean or mountains?
Ocean.
Mhm. Comedy or dramas?
Drama.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Favorite dessert?
Fondante.
She
makes it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good then.
Yeah.
It is good then.
Yeah.
It is perfect. Okay, other questions. Let's go with questions from the group. And then also online, we may get, I know we've got like 1,000 people online as well, but what questions might you have of Judith on her research or what she does or anything you want to ask?
Anything but my age.
No, that was when you were young. I was just trying to. Yes.
So I'm just curious about what other organizations you're involved with in the community, and this is not to have you talk about my organization, but I know you're involved in tons of things. So what are all of the things that you're involved with?
Yes, I'm involved with, of course, in Leadership Springfield. I've met really good friends there. I really encourage people to get involved in that. Philip, Chad, who's here from Leadership Springfield? A bunch of people. Yeah. So I really like that organization. I'm involved in Dallas with Jordana, who's another badass lady. Yeah, I'm involved with Emmy over there, a girl like me network, another badass lady. I'm quoting Cliff says that word a lot. Hand in Hand Multicultural Center, also, hospice. I'm also involved with that. I don't know, I think that might be it.
That's,
Oh, Rotary, yes, Rotary.
you're in my club.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, Rotary. Yeah, I like to be involved. My mom, just taught me that you have to help and be involved in in the community. And so actually it wasn't my mom, it was my grandpa. He made us be involved. As a pastor's grandkid, I had to sing, I had to teach, I had to do everything at church. So then you just kind of do that in the community too.
Other questions? Then Angie, if we have some online too.
Giovanni,
You know,
How would you say you've seen the growth of the Latino community here in Springfield? As you know, we've done great strides and coming together and making great things, but from what your perspective is, how far do you say we've come? What do you have to say about it?
well, one of the things that I'm very proud of is that right now we have the Latino alumni. That says something. The Latino, having a Latino alumni and, we just had an event, I can't remember when, but, we had a whole table, we had a representation. I can tell you, about the first Latina girl we recruited as a part of a recruitment strategy that we implemented in the College of Education. And I remember we recruited Marta Rueda. And, we went and talked to her parents and told them how safe it was, how safe Missouri is, even like, asking for her hand. But, we recruited her, we recruited Rudy Martinez, we recruited David Valenciano, now I cannot tell you all the names of the people that, that we've recruited, and Jordana was involved in that process as well. But now she's got Alas, which is another part, in the community, and now she helps people, come to higher education. So I think we have been able to build a pipeline, right? A pipeline where people can access resources in the community. So they're again, not in a lonely journey, but as a part of something. So I think that's a different thing. When I came here, I don't think we had so many options. And right now there's more opportunities to belong.
very good. Then questions in the chat, you can always put questions.
Wendy
in the
had a
chat.
question.
Yeah.
And for those of us who take the welcome the travelers seriously, for those of us who should, what's one thing that you would say that each of us could do to welcome someone from another country?
I tell my children in the Latino community, for instance, we don't have such a thing. I think I'm an introvert. I do recharge, even though it doesn't look like that, but I do, Saturdays but anyways, we don't have a thing like introvert, extrovert. You smile and greet everybody in the room. And I think a smile can go a long way. I think we can all do that. That's an easy one. That's everyone's language. And, it's not, I'm not a morning person. I'm not and I'm telling you this because I collect data from, faculty. And one of the things they say, I feel bad when people don't tell me good morning, when people don't tell me, how are you? When people don't make eye contact, and the excuse that other people give is, I'm not a morning person. Well, I don't care who you are, you smile and greet, because that's the way my mom raised me, or she would. She's not paying attention, but anyway.
She's smiling now.
Wooden spoon she had, yeah, but anyway. So I think smiling, Wendy, Philip would be a great ambassador. I'll put him on the spot. You smile and you make people feel welcome. That's all you need. You don't need to speak different language. And I tell my students that, and when I teach the multicultural education class, I tell them, you're not gonna be able to learn every single language, every single culture, but you can always smile. And you're not gonna be friends with everybody, but you can be friendly with everybody.
Very basic, but good. Yes. Oh, we'll go back here. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, John. In relation to your research and everything with violence and everything, and the recent arrest of Almeo and Chapo's son, it seems like as America, we're always like we try to get these headline arrests and think it's going to make some type of difference. I guess with your research and the violence and everything that's going on, does anything like that actually make a difference in Mexico, or is it the next man up and then things just continue as on?
This is what I tell my students when they ask me, how can we solve this problem, this violence? And I quote Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is a researcher, the best researcher on violence. And she says, the worst type of violence in the world is when it's systemic. Because when the violence is systemic, you can't really find the source. So El Chapo or El Mayo are not really the source. They're part of the problem. But the problem is corruption, the problem is poverty, the problem is education, the problem is patriarchy, the problem is it's so much that you can't really eradicate it. So we have to really, if we want to fight the violence in Mexico and truly make a difference, we have to attack the issue from different areas. Everybody has to get involved in as little or as much as possible. So it does, it does change a little, but it's not a huge impact like that because of the type of violence that is systemic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's discouraging, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, how did you get involved in collaborating with other departments, like the coders
Yeah,
that you were involved in? How did that?
yeah, I think, I started attending, Nancy Courtney is not here, but I used to attend everything in the university. I took advantage of all the resources that the university offered, and I would just meet people, and I would meet somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And then I got invited to work in projects because I was meeting, people at different projects. I'm also very social, and my husband is super social. He invites everybody to our house. So then, when he feeds them, then all of a sudden I'm working on a project that I wasn't planning on. But, I think, mainly because I wanted to learn. And so Robert would always encourage me, go to that, go to that, go to that. And I would just go, to things. And, I got involved, for instance, in that grant. Coders is a $4 million grant that we got for the university. And, we're helping about 44 teachers in rural areas to teach children how to integrate coding with writing, both. So it's not just coding and it's not just writing, but it's both. And Carrie Franklin is the leader, and she invited me to that, to be a part of that grant. Yeah.
I read a headline not long ago that intrigued me very much. I'm not quite sure how to pose the question, but not from a political standpoint, but what do you think of the future of Mexico today with the new president?
I have to be biased because I was in that party. I think, a women president for Mexico, which is a very patriarchal country, is huge. It's huge. I'm very proud that, Mexicans, left that part of the culture behind and took a step forward and voted for a woman because of the project that she was offering.
Well, it's not only because she was a woman, but I'm pretty sure Mexico is very much a Catholic nation, and she's not Catholic.
Yeah, that's another
When
thing.
I read that, I thought, this is a big change.
Yeah, I'm not Catholic either, which was always a struggle growing up. I was always kind of, segregated from, I'm Presbyterian, yeah. But, it's not popular in Mexico. When I was growing up, I remember it was 98% Catholic, 2% something else, and I was part of the 2%. So I think, people are really working now finally together towards a project of a nation that this woman is offering, and they are, happy with what the former president or with the current president, did, because, a lot of programs were in place and they were successful. And so I think they're looking at results, and I think, that's great. I'm very happy that it's a woman.
Growing up, you were around government
Yes.
your whole life. You're
Yes.
around the president of Mexico
Yeah.
your whole life.
Yeah.
Tell us that
I'll
experience.
tell you a joke. One time my mother invited me to the house of a president because it was his birthday. And we don't like that president anymore, but anyways, we were friends. And we went to Felipe Calderon, we went to his, birthday party. And it was like 30 people. And then I also I got sick that day. But COVID didn't exist, it was just a cold. So I went to his birthday party and, you know, a bunch of governors and things like that. And then I came back and there was, I think it was something at Cliff's house. And somebody from Missouri State told me, well, Judith, how do you feel? You know? And I was like, why? Oh, you came from Mexico and now you're at Cliff's house. And I thought, was just with the Mexican president. So great, you know, thank you, Blake, for inviting me. But I think, you know, one of the things that that it has worked, it's that power does not, you know, Foucault was one of my favorite writers. Foucault, do not fall in love with power. Power does not, oh my gosh, he said, you know, because a governor for me, I grew up around governors. You know, like I said, my mom calls the president dude, like, hey dude. You know, so that does not impress me. I know they're just humans, and I think that's a blessing. Yeah.
So what's in store for the future for you?
Well, I really wanna, I don't know, maybe I'm romantic. I like to spend time with my husband now that I'm tenure. I wanna, yeah. I owe him that, yeah. So I wanna spend time with him. I really, I worked very hard when I was doing my PhD, you know, that I commuted to Arkansas, there was no online. We camped, during the summers because we could not afford a house there, so we would camp in parks. And Chuy would cook in the, you know, start fire and cook there. And so we really spent a lot of time, and then when I was getting tenure, I really wanted to, you know, be an overachiever, and I worked very hard to publish a lot. And I think now I owe it to my family and also my friends. I try to be very intentional about spending time with friends. I used to, you know, just read and hide for a long time. And now, you know, my weekends are for my friends. You know, I try to spend a lot of time as possible with my family because I hold the title of the PhD, but we all work together so that I could get it.
One last question, or comment from anybody? Yes, Bruce.
You regularly take your students or some of your students to Mexico to introduce them to?
I haven't done a study away trip because we have a lot of study away trips that go to South America or Spain. And so we kind of try to not overlap. I kind of bring the culture to the classroom. I do little things. One of the things that they love the most that they tell me when they write comments is when I bring speakers from the Latinx community. And they love that. You know, they love hearing perspectives. I bring the writers of the books that we're reading in class, and that's a way for me, you know, to do that. I have taken administrators to Mexico for research exchanges. Like I said, David Hoff visited Mexico many times. Chris Craig visited Mexico many times as well. Can't remember who else, but yeah. If anybody wants to go, I'll sign you up.
Very good. Well, thank you for spending time with us, and we're proud of you. We're proud you're our genius, Missouri State University, and we know you've got a bright future ahead of a lot of great things that bring cultures together. But I love it. Just smile and be good to people.
Yeah.
That's what you are. Good to people.
Thank you.
And Mom, we're glad to have Mom here. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for being here for our lunch with genius. Go Bears.